Hey guys, welcome back to our lecture on company law. In today's topic, you'll be learning about meetings. So what exactly are meetings? Meetings are nothing but an assembly or gathering or coming together of two or more people for transacting any lawful business. Now, why is meetings relevant for a company? Why is this relevant? Because you all know company is an artificial person. So what does artificial person mean? Artificial person means company also will be enjoying the same rights just like a natural person, with few exceptions. That means company has its own name for its identification, it can hold assets in its name, it can dispose of assets in its own name, it can enter into various contracts for the attainment of its objects in its own name, and also it has the right to sue and to be sued. Now, when we are talking about so much of rights for a company, you also need to understand when we are talking about attainment of objectives, there are so many decisions that needs to be taken on behalf of the company. Now, when we say company is taking a decision, is it company thinking on its own? Does company have a physical existence? No, right? Company's existence only in the eyes of law, and it does not have any physical existence. Now, who takes decisions on behalf of the company? The decisions on behalf of the company is taken by board of directors. So when you were learning about features of company, I told you there is separation from ownership and separation from management. Decision making process is with the authority of the board of directors. So who are board of directors? So when the owners start the company, they have the right to appoint certain persons to manage the company. So these persons individually are called as directors and collectively are called as board of directors. Now, when we say the board of directors have the sole authority to manage the company, having said that, you also need to remember to protect the interest of shareholders, there are certain powers also with the shareholders to take part in the decision making process. Now, all these decision making process either done by the board of directors or by the owners, that is the members or the shareholders, it is done through meetings. That means two or more people, that is either two or more directors or two or more shareholders, depending on the kind of meeting, they would come together to transact any lawful business. So all that provisions which are relevant to meetings is what you'll be studying. So in this topic, you'll be learning about what are the classifications or what are the types of meetings, and also those important relevant provisions which make each type of meeting a valid meeting. So let's begin with the topic. So firstly, let's understand the powers to manage a company. So when I was talking about powers to manage a company, I told you the powers to manage a company is entrusted with the board of directors, but also to protect the shareholders' interest, there are certain powers given to the shareholders as well. That means the powers to manage a company is divided between the board of directors and the members. So members are also called as shareholders or owners. So these are the people who have contributed capital to the company. On contribution of capital, a share will be allotted to these members. On allotment of shares, they are called as shareholders. So also remember, these are the people who are the initial subscribers to the memorandum. So now the powers to manage a company or to take decisions for a company is divided between the board of directors and between the members or shareholders or owners. So all these three terms means one and the same. So now, when you're talking about powers of managing a company is divided between board of directors and shareholders, now you need to understand what are the powers which are solely entrusted with board of directors and what are the powers where shareholders will have a say in the company's matters. Can shareholders keep involving between the decision taken by the board of directors, or the board of directors will have the final say is the question. To have a classification on the powers of company, if you remember, there is one important document which is called as Articles of Association and Memorandum of Association. So to quickly revise, what is Memorandum of Association? It is nothing but a document which sets out the fundamental details about the company, that is name, the situation, the objects, the liability, capital, subscription and nomination clause in case of one-person company. What is Articles of Association? Articles of Association is nothing but the bylaws or the rules and regulations which are required for governing the internal functioning of the company, right? Now remember, company is an artificial person and it is functioning through the members and board of directors. So while taking any decisions, there are so many rules and regulations sets which is mentioned in the Articles of Association, both the board of directors as well as the shareholders should abide by the rules and regulations specified in the articles. Now, in the articles of association, you have come across various clauses, right? That is, there will be rules on allotment of shares, there will be rules on forfeiture of shares, there will be rules on lien of shares. Similarly, there will be rules on powers of board of directors. So, in articles of association, there would be a clause which talks about powers of board of directors, which means only board of directors can transact those matters specified in articles of association. That means they have exclusive rights to transact or to take decisions, all those specified in the articles of association. So, to classify, board of directors, they receive power from articles of association to make any decisions on the company, and in case of members, it will be from anything apart from articles of association, which means basically, as I said, in articles of association there would be a clause which talks on powers of directors. That means only directors will have the powers to take decisions on those matters specified in articles of association. Having said that, these powers can also be restricted or limited. That means, let's say in the articles of association, one would be to authorize buyback of securities. So, buyback of securities is nothing but to buy back the securities which are issued by the company itself. That means they would be paying the money to the shareholders and they would be buying back the securities which are issued. For this, the powers to buy back or to approve the buyback is divided between board of directors and shareholders. So, when will the board of directors have the power to buy back the securities? That means to approve the buyback of securities if it is less than 10% of paid up capital plus free reserves. So, in such cases, when the buyback of securities is less than 10% of the total paid up capital plus free reserves, then the board of directors will have the power to take that decision, yes, we want to buy back the securities. So, once the board of directors approve this, they don't have to take further approvals. But again, if you remember, I told you the shareholders will also have power. When will board of directors have to take shareholders approval? It is quite obvious that anything which is beyond their powers, they have to take the approvals of shareholders. So, for buyback of securities, if it is more than 10% but less than 25% of paid up capital plus free reserves. So, the shareholders will have power more than 10% but less than 25% of paid up share capital and free reserves. That means for buying back, the maximum limit for a company will be 25%. But again, this power of approving the buyback of securities is divided between the board of directors and shareholders. When will board of directors exercise this power? Only when it is less than 10% and not more than 10%. And in case they have to buy back securities which are more than 10% but within less than 25%. So, in such cases, they have to call a meeting of shareholders. They have to inform shareholders that we are proposing to buy back our securities. So, please give your approval. So, once the shareholders are giving approval, that means they will have the right to take decision whether to buy back the securities or not. So, coming back to the provisions of articles of association. So, remember, in articles of association, there would be a clause called as powers of board of directors, which says these are the transactions where it should be taken only by board of directors in the board meeting. So, anything apart from specified in the articles of association, then those approvals should be given by shareholders. So, now let's move on to the next topic. You will be learning about different types of meetings. So, types of meetings are broadly classified into first one, the board meeting. So, as you were all aware that why is meetings relevant? That means when company has to take any decision on its own, it cannot take, right? Because it's an artificial person. So, all the decisions are taken on behalf of the company by the natural persons who could be board of directors or by shareholders. So, when board of directors are taking any decision on behalf of the company, they would take all those decisions in the board meeting. Next, coming to general meeting. As I said, the powers to manage a company is also with the shareholders. So shareholders will be taking their decisions on behalf of the company in the general meeting. So general meeting is further classified into annual general meeting and extraordinary general meeting. So what is the difference between AGM and EGM is what you'll be learning in the next upcoming videos. So next is class meetings. So what is class meetings? Class meetings are nothing but those meetings which are restricted to one class of persons in the company. So let's say when a company has to take any decisions pertaining to preference shareholders only, that means the rights attached to preference shareholders are varied, then only preference shareholders will be attending a meeting, and such meeting will be coming under the category of class meetings. Another example would be creditors. So when will a company call only creditors meeting? So when one company has to wind up, it has to compulsorily call all the creditors saying that we are winding up the company. To take their consent to wind up and to settle off their debts, they have to call a meeting of creditors. So only creditors of the company are attending a company meeting. That would be coming under the category of class meetings. So likewise, debenture shareholders meeting. So again, when any decision has to be taken pertaining to debenture holders or their rights are varied, only the debenture holders are entitled to attend a meeting. So that would again come under the category of class meetings. So now you'll be understanding the provisions of board meeting in this video. The provisions of AGM and EGM will be learning in the next upcoming videos. So let's start with the board meeting. So as you all know, all the provisions of any act, be it Companies Act or Indian Contract Act, are categorized on the basis of section, right? Now, the rules and regulations or the provisions pertaining to board meeting are specified in section 173. So in this section 173, what are the things or what are the provisions you'll be learning about board meeting? Firstly, what is board meeting? Second, you'll be learning about frequency. So frequency of board meeting means how many board meetings should be held in a year. Third, requisites of valid meeting. See, when we say requisites of valid meeting means, so when you're calling any meeting, be it board meeting or AGM or EGM or class meetings, there are certain rules and regulations that needs to be followed. So where are rules and regulations prescribed for a company? You all know it is prescribed in Articles of Association, right? It is nothing but a document which sets out the rules and regulations for internal governing of the company. So articles will be framed as per Companies Act 2013 or for the older companies as per the previous law. Now, what are the requisites of valid meeting? That means whatever decision taken in the board meeting, that decision to be valid, those board resolutions to be valid, the meeting should be valid. So under requisites of valid meeting, you'll be learning about notice. So which means while calling a board meeting, notice should be given to all the board of directors, and what is the mode of giving notice, and also what is the time limit within which notice should be given. Secondly, coming to quorum. Quorum, as I said, is nothing but the minimum number of directors to be present in the meeting to make this meeting valid. So what is the minimum number of directors, and also what if the minimum number of directors are not present in the meeting? What happens to that meeting? So these are the provisions you will be learning. And also, in case a company defaults in complying any of these provisions, what are the consequences? That means what is the penalty levied on the company? So let's start with the provisions of board meeting. So the board meeting, as I said, first we'll be talking about time of holding board meeting, because you've already learned what is a board meeting. It is nothing but when board of directors have to take any decisions pertaining to a company on behalf of the company, they would take all those decisions or discuss those matters in a board meeting, and a valid board of resolution will be passed. So this is the first one. Second, as I said, the frequency of holding board meeting. That means how many times a board meeting should be held in a year. So for this, it is categorized on the basis of first meeting and subsequent meeting. So section 173 says every company should be holding at least one board meeting within 30 days of its incorporation. Let's say certificate of incorporation is received on 1st June 2018. So within 30 days, That means the maximum time limit for holding the first board meeting from the date of incorporation is 30 days. So within 30 days, the company after incorporation should convene a board meeting, and board of directors should be discussing those operations which are necessary for commencement of the business. So this is the first requirement. So thereafter, after the first board meeting is concluded, in a year at least 4 board meetings should be held. So here it says minimum 4 board meetings. So remember, Companies Act 2013 says minimum requirement of holding a board meeting, but there is no maximum limit. So as and when the board of directors can call for a board meeting, they can call. So there is no restrictions on the maximum number of limit. So this is the time limit for holding board meeting. Next, the gap between first board meeting and the second board meeting should not exceed 120 days. That means if a company has, what is the statutory requirement? The Companies Act says a company should at least hold 4 board meetings in a year, right? And maximum depending on the requirement of the company. And section 173 says the gap between 2 board meetings should not be exceeding 120 days. That means at least in 4 months 1 board meeting should be held. So again, remember, these are minimum requirements and not maximum requirements. So what is the time limit of holding board meeting? First of all, on incorporation of a company should hold its first board meeting within 30 days of its incorporation, and thereafter at least 4 board meetings in a year. And also the gap between one board meeting and the other board meeting should not be exceeding 120 days. So this is the first provision. So what is notice? Notice is nothing but a document which sets out what is the date of board meeting, where is it held, and what are the matters to be discussed in the board meeting. This notice of board meeting will be given only to the board of directors. So remember, board meetings are attended only by board of directors, and nobody else apart from the directors can attend the board meeting. So let's see what are the provisions in relation to notice of board meeting. So first of all, to whom? As I said, it's a quite obvious question, because only board of directors are entitled or allowed to attend a board meeting. So the notice of board meeting should be given to every director of the company. So in the upcoming videos, you'll be learning about the types of companies. There you will understand what are the different categories of directors. So no matter whether it's a managing director, executive director, nominee director, whatever is the case may be, all the directors are entitled to receive the notice of the board meeting. Next, by when? As I said, for calling a meeting, a notice should be given. There is a statutory limit, that is at least within 7 days of holding a board meeting, the notice should be given. So remember, again, this is the minimum days. Again, it could be much before that. So they can give 21 days notice, prior notice, or 30 days prior notice, not necessary only 7, but the Companies Act says not less than 7 days. At least 7 days prior notice should be given. Next, mode of giving notice. So mode of giving notice is again further classified. In case once the notice is drafted, once it is approved, the same notice can be given by hand delivery to the director if they are present in the company, or it could be sent through post to the registered or address of the director, or it could also be sent through electronic means. So either of these modes are a valid mode of giving notice. So remember, board meeting notice should be given to every director. Whether to attend a meeting or not, it is at the discretion of the director, but notice should be sent to every director. By when? At least 7 days prior notice should be given before the date of holding board meeting. And how is it given? Either by hand delivery, or by post, or by electronic means. So next, continuing the provisions of board meeting notice. So again, as I said, there is statutory notice time limit and also shorter notice. So in case of statutory notice, you all know minimum 7 days. But it so happens in case of emergency, let's say there is an important decision to be taken in a company and 7 days notice could not be given. That means, can you call a board meeting with less than 7 days notice period? So if you're calling a board meeting with less than 7 days notice period, it is called as shorter notice. So in such case, what are the provisions? See, remember, in law there is always a general rule and also a variation. Depending on the situation, depending on the emergency conditions, a board meeting can be called by giving less than 7 days notice and it will still be valid. When can it be valid? Only when a company follows these provisions. So the first provision says, what is shorter notice? Any notice given to the directors to attend a board meeting which is less than 7 days. So what are the provisions to be complied? First of all, one independent director should be present. So as I said, in the next video you will be learning about different types of directors. So among that, one type of director is independent director. So independent directors are those directors who do not have any pecuniary relationship with the company apart from receiving the sitting fees for attending the board meeting. So here basically they don't have any real interest in the company in form of receiving any form of remuneration apart from the sitting fees. So for any meeting to be valid which is called at less than 7 days notice, in such cases one independent director should be present in the meeting. And also remember, all companies do not require independent directors. It is only few class of companies where independent directors are compulsory. For those kinds of company where independent director is not compulsory, so the provisions of articles of association would be applicable. So let's assume a company has independent director and they're calling a meeting by giving less than 7 days notice. So in such cases, in that meeting to become a valid meeting, at least one independent director should be present in the board meeting. So let's say the independent director could not attend the meeting. Will that meeting be valid? No, it will not be valid because this provision should be complied with, right? But again, for this also there is an exception. What is that exception? It says if one independent director is not present in the meeting to make it valid, then the resolution should be circulated to all the directors, and only on ratification of the resolution by at least one director this meeting will be valid, which means first provision says, first of all, the general rule is notice should be given at least 7 days before the date of meeting. In case of emergency, you can call a board meeting by giving less than 7 days notice period. For that, what is the requirement? The requirement is at least one independent director, if any, should be attending the meeting. If independent director could not attend the meeting, then what is the consequence? The resolution which is passed in the meeting, or that should be circulated to all the directors, and only on ratification. Ratification means approval. Only on approval by one independent director at least, then the resolution will be valid. So this is the provision for calling a board meeting by giving less than 7 days notice. Next, moving on to board meeting for one-person company. So what is a one-person company? One-person company is nothing but a company which has only one person as the member. So now when you were learning about the provisions of OPC, I told you again a member is different and directors are different, because even OPC is a company wherein there is a separation of management and separation of ownership. So member means a person who is the owner of the company. Directors may be members or may not be members. So what is the minimum number of directors for an OPC? It is 1, and maximum it is 15, right? Because one-person company comes under the category of private company. So the provisions applying to private company will also apply to one-person company. So the maximum limit a OPC can have as directors is 15. Again, if they want to increase the number of directors by altering the articles of association, they can increase the number of directors, right? Now, will board meeting provisions apply to a one-person company? You have to understand this logic. Remember, meeting will be valid only if there are at least 2 persons, and for an OPC minimum requirement is only 1, right? That means whether a board meeting should be applicable for an OPC or not depends on the number of board of directors present in the OPC. So for this, you will have to understand one-person company, when is it necessary to have a board meeting and when is it not necessary to have a board meeting. When is it necessary? When is it not necessary? Obviously, when there is only one director, there is no requirement of holding a board meeting. So only one person cannot make a valid meeting. So now, if there are more than one director, then the board meeting provisions would be applied. So whatever provisions you have studied about holding of board meeting, the time limit of board meeting, and also notice will also apply to one-person company, but in different form. So when is it necessary? When there are more than one director. So maximum limit of a one-person company to have a director is 15, which could be increased again by altering the articles of association. So remember, in exam, if a question is asked, if board meeting is required for an OPC or not. Your answer is dependent on whether a company whether an OPC has one director or more than one director. If there is only one director, the provisions of board meeting will not apply. If there are more than one director, then the provisions of board meeting will apply. So now, when there are more than one director, at least 2 board meetings in a calendar year should be held. So remember, for private companies and public companies, what were the minimum number of board meetings? It was 4 in a year, right? Since 1% company, the number of regulations or compliances are less, the number of minimum board meeting is also less. In case of a private and public, it was 4. In case of a 1% company, it is 2 board meetings in a calendar year. Next, gap between 2 board meetings is not less than 90 days. So whereas private companies and public companies, the gap between 2 board meetings should not be exceeding 120 days, right? But in case of a 1% company, the gap between 2 board meetings is not less than 90 days. So these are the board meeting provisions which will apply for an OPC. The provisions on notice will also apply to OPC. That means they have to give at least minimum 7 days prior notice for calling a board meeting, and also for shorter notice, what are the rules and regulations will be as per the articles of association, and the independent directors provisions will not apply to OPC because OPC need not have an independent director. It is only at the discretion of the company to have an independent director or not applies to an OPC. So these were the provisions of board meeting for an OPC. Next, moving on to quorum. So as I said, requisites of a valid meeting, one was notice, second is quorum. So you all know, for a meeting to be valid, at least there should be 2 persons, right? But the maximum number of limit of directors for a public, private and OPC is 15, right? So when there are 15 directors, how many directors should be actually attending the board meeting is what you will be learning. So quorum is nothing but minimum number of directors to be present in the meeting to make the meeting valid. So the quorum of a board meeting is either 1/3 of the total strength of the board of directors or 2, whichever is higher. So this is the quorum. So in case a company has 15 directors, 1/3 of the total 15 directors should be attending the board meeting either physically or through video conferencing or any other audio visual means where the board meeting proceedings can be recorded. So earlier in Companies Act 1956, audiovisual means and video conferencing board meetings were not valid. Now in Companies Act 2013, a board meeting can be held even through video conferencing, even that will be valid. So whether the directors are physically attending the meeting or through video conferencing, at least 1/3 of the total strength of the directors of the company should be attending or taking participation in the board meeting, or 2, whichever is the higher limit. So this will be the quorum. Let's say they have called for a board meeting and at least 1/3 should be present in the meeting to be making it valid. What if the minimum number of directors are not present in the meeting? So in case there is no quorum, what is the consequences of the validity of meeting? So the provision says, that is section 173 says, in case the quorum is not present within half an hour of the time of board meeting, that means if the board meeting is scheduled at 9 AM on a particular date, within 9:30 if the quorum is not present, then the meeting will be adjourned. Adjourned means the meeting will be postponed. When will the meeting be postponed? It will be postponed to the same day, same time to the next week, provided it's not a national holiday. So these are the provisions of the adjournment of the board meeting. So what is adjournment? Adjournment means postponing the meeting. Why will it be postponed? Because the requisite number of board of directors were not present in the meeting to make a meeting valid. When the quorum is not present, if you pass any board resolution, that board resolution will not be treated as valid. In such cases, the board meeting will be postponed to the same day, same time and the next week, provided it's not a national holiday. If it is a national holiday, then the board meeting will be automatically postponed to the next succeeding day. So these are the provisions of quorum. What is quorum? Quorum is nothing but minimum number of directors to be present in the board meeting to make a meeting valid. So what is the minimum requirement? 1/3 of the total strength of the total directors, or 2, whichever is higher. In case quorum is not present within half an hour, it will be adjourned. So this is the provisions of quorum. Now we are talking about the last segment of this provision of section 173, penalty for default in holding the board meeting. That means all those provisions which you just learned, In case there is any non-compliances, what are the consequences? First of all, what was the compliance? That is statutory meeting, that is within 30 days. This is the first compliance. Second, at least 4 board meetings in a year. Then gap not exceeding 120 days. Next, coming to notice, 7 days notice, shorter notice, that is presence of one independent director. Next, 6th is quorum, which is 1/3 of the total strength or 2, whichever is higher. In case quorum is not present, the meeting will not be valid. So these are the provisions of sections 173. In case there is any non-compliance of any of these provisions, then penalty will be levied. So who is liable to pay penalty? It is obviously the person who has to comply with these provisions. So the penalty will be levied on officer in default. And also, what is the quantum of penalty? It is rupees 25,000. So remember, this is the maximum limit. It can be less than that, provided it depends on what is the non-compliance of the provision. How severe is the non-compliances? So these were the provisions of board meeting. So board meeting is basically a meeting where only board of directors are entitled to attend to transact those matters which are specified in the articles of association. To transact any of those matters, they have to convene a board meeting, and those meetings should be valid, and the resolutions passed in that particular meeting to be valid. These are the compliances. So with this, we'll be concluding on the topic of board meeting. In the next meeting, you'll be learning about the provisions of annual general meeting and also extraordinary general meeting. So with this, we'll conclude. Thank you.
Hello everyone. So here we are to discuss an interesting subject, communication. Keep apart everything. So focus on communication. Don't take it as a subject. Learn it as a process. So it will be much interesting. When you think as a subject, one of the simplest subject in your curriculum. When you think as a topic to be understood, one of the most interesting thing. So here we are understanding something, explaining something and communicating something through communication. So what is communication? Generally, a conversation between two people will be known as communication. Conversation between two or more people also can be known as communication. The word communication is derived from Latin word communicare, which means to spread. See, the name itself gives you. Word communication means to spread across. What to spread? Information, messages or anything of importance can be spread. So in this first module of communication, let's see what are our goals to be studied. So the first goal of communication is to understand the process of communication. What is the process of communication? How does it take place? Who are the parties in communication? The second important goal is to recognize the types of communication. There are various types of communication. So one is to recognize what are the various types of communication available through which we can choose one. The next important goal is to understand and apply varied structures and networks in communication. Each language has its own structure and network. So communication has to follow some structure and network to be followed. The next goal is to use techniques of skilled communication. To be a successful communicator or to be a successful communication, we need to understand some techniques as well as skills. That is effective, be precise, be competent. We learn in the further part of the module. The last important goal is to understand the barriers in communication. What are the barriers that prevent you from effective communication? There may be technological barrier, language barrier, cultural barrier, etc. We'll later on discuss all these in detail. So now, basically, what is communication? An essential part in our everyday life. We communicate with each others. Why do we communicate? We communicate to express, share ideas, thoughts, feelings and resolve problem. So communication is an essential part in everyday life. We communicate with one another to share our ideas, express thoughts, feelings and resolve problems. Generally, there are two parties in a communication. First one is encoder and second one is decoder. So it's a cycle, it's an ongoing process, a never-ending process, anything you can call. Now, what is the process of communication? How does a communication happen? With the help of a diagram, let's explain it. He is a sender. A person who will send a message is known as sender. What does he do? He has to encode a message. Encoders form a message. So see now, and he will be forming a message. Hi, call me. You can see. So now he has to choose a medium through which he will send to the decoder. So now he has chosen a media through his phone. He will be sending it to the decoder. The receiver or the decoder receives the message. What happens next is he decodes the message. That is, he reads the message and the message was to call. So he takes out his phone and he gives the call. That is decoding and further giving the feedback. So this is the process of communication. First, a person, sender, he will frame a message, that is known as encoding. He'll choose a channel for sending the message, that is a channel of communication. Decoder or receiver, he will decode the message and finally he'll give the feedback. So this is a never-ending cyclic process of communication. Process of communication involves two parties, sender or receiver or encoder or decoder. Now, in communication, we have verbal communication, non-verbal communication, visual communication, etc. When coming into verbal communication, we have two categories. One is oral communication, what we speak. So see, the discussion between two girls are going on. Hi, hello, hi, how are you? I am fine. So general talk or general discussion among two people is known as verbal communication, or communicating with the help of words or speaking is known as verbal communication. Very simple, right? We do verbal communication every day. You speak to your parents, it's verbal communication. You speak to your friends, it is verbal communication. The next type of communication is written communication. Whatever you write a letter to someone, a way of communicating, written communication. You draft a message in your phone. The most used form of communication is sending messages. We do text in message, we do text in WhatsApp, etc. right? So that is written communication. So verbal communication is two types. Generally, it is the usage of words and languages is known as verbal communication. One, we use the words to speak. The other one, we use the words to write or create a text. So oral and written communication. Now the important thing, it is not necessary that everything has to be spoken or written. There is another form of communication known as non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication happens majority of the time. A survey said that in an organization, 70% of the communication is non-verbal. It is not just the members of the organization communicate through words. It is through their body language, their structure, they communicate. So one of the important form of communication is non-verbal communication. Let's see what are all the different types of non-verbal communication. First one is facial expressions. See, how do you know your friend is not so happy? Even if he doesn't say to you, his face expressions, right? How do you know somebody is sad? When you see tears rolling their eyes, you feel okay, the particular person is sad. Or how do you know someone is very cheerful? When they smile, laugh or show so much of energy, you feel that okay, the other person is very happy. So this is facial expression. Showing the feelings through our face is known as facial expression. One can express surprise, shock, anger, everything. So one of the important aspect of non-verbal communication is facial expression. The second one is paralanguage. That is the tone in which you speak to others. See, if you are polite, your tone will be different. If you are angry, your tone will be different, right? So paralanguage is your body language and the mannerism which will give a feedback to other person that you are not happy or you are polite. So this is also one more type of non-verbal communication. Next is aesthetic communication. This is a very different type of communication. Usually this type of communication is done by a painter or an artist or someone who is very creative. They communicate their feelings through the art which they know. See, for example, a painter, he draws beautiful pictures out of imagination. That is his way of communicating his feelings. A dancer, for that example, will beautifully tell you a story. Even if you are not a dancer, a person sitting in front of a dancer will understand what they are trying to say. That kind of communication is known as aesthetic communication. Communicating something with the help of art, with creativity. That is known as aesthetic communication. The next is your appearance. First impression is the best impression. Usually we say a person who is neat and tidy in appearance will make feel okay, he is fit for the job. See, best example, the man with the nice coat, tie and a bag shows that he is a very polite person, he is a very disciplined person. And this appearance will give you a clear picture that the person is not so interested in the job. So always your appearance also will communicate so much to the person standing in front of you. Next is simple, or symbols, whatever we use. We have symbols for so many things. So symbols give you an information. Whenever you go through a road, there are so many symbols saying no right turn, no left turn, it's a one way, or no auto rickshaws on the road, right? So symbols also form a type of communication. So these are the various types of non-verbal communication, that is communicating to another without the help of words. That is non-verbal. Verbal means we communicate with the help of words. Non-verbal means we communicate without the help of words. So I think you got the difference now. One more type of communication is visual communication. Communicating something with the help of a picture. See, do not litter here or save our earth. We see many such kind of visuals coming in our newspapers, magazines, etc. Right? That is communicating to large number of audience without using a word or any emotions. It's just a pictorial representation. So these are the types of communication. Now, in an organization, generally communication is of two types. One is formal, where a team leader or a manager will be communicating with the subordinates, or it happens in a formal backdrop. Another type of communication is informal. You, your teammates, everybody sits together, chat something, have some gossips. That is known as informal communication. Formal will be always in a context of formal communication like meetings, discussions, debates, etc. Informal can happen in a cafeteria or in a desk space, anywhere. Now, there are various networks. How does a communication happen in an organization? We as friends, there are no much networks, right? I speak to you, you can speak back to me. But in an organization, there is a network to be followed in a communication. First type of network is known as vertical network. Vertical, top down, bottom up, we call, right? See, in vertical network, there will be a person, let's say he is a manager. He needs to send a message to his subordinate. So vertical is either top down or bottom up. So see here, the manager intends to send a message to the subordinates. He will send it to the subordinate. Subordinate in turn will take the message, read it and give the feedback to the top level. Simple, right? Manager sending it down, subordinate understands it or decode it and send it back. Simple. One arrow to the downwards, one arrow to the upward. That is vertical network. The next network is circuit. It's like a small circle or it goes on. For example, one employee, another employee of the same category. They may want to share information. So one person wants to send a message to his subordinate or his team member. So he sends the message to the team member gets it and sends back the feedback. This is a circuit, sending from here to there, no particular network. The next is chain network. What is chain network? There will be one top management. Below him there are two subordinates. Again below him there are two subordinates. It is like manager, department heads, team leaders. So first the manager will send the messages to the department heads. In turn the department heads will send the messages to team leaders or the next in the hierarchy. So this is why it is known as chain. It follows a proper network. First, second, and then low. If there are any other people, they can send it further. It acts as a chain. There is a neat chain in this. The next network is known as wheel network. Here, wheel network is typically good for your small scale organization because there is one person will be sending messages to various other people. Say for example, the person standing, let's take him as a manager, and rest of them are various departments. Here, each other will not send messages, but in turn, the manager or the concerned person will be sending the messages to each and every other person. This kind of network is helpful only in your small scale organization where there are less number of people and each one can be contacted by the manager itself. The next type of network is star network. There is no particular hierarchy in this network. A person who intends to get some message from someone can always send the message, take the message. See, this diagram will clearly give how does it work. From 1 to B, him to her, neatly it will go in a format of a star. Why do we call star is there is no proper hierarchy or like vertical or your wheel. It is not that one person should send to someone other. Anybody can send the information to anyone as and when it is required. Now, we'll come to the characteristics of effective communication. To make a communication effective, what are the characteristics that one need to have followed? First one is clear. Be clear on what you want to say. Do not use so much of technical words like jargons. Be precise. Say it up to the point. That is clear. Be clear. Whenever you write a business communication, make sure the words you write is understandable to the person to whom you are communicating. Concise. That is, keep it very simple. Keep it small. Do not use idioms, poetic phrases, and do not use lengthy sentences. Use small sentences. Make it meaningful, which can be understood quickly in a fraction of second. Because no one will have much time to read the entire story. So make it very clear and then concise and then concrete. That is, keep up to the points. Whatever points you want to explain, have facts on it. Do not include vague facts. Have the right data or right facts. The next important characteristic is coherent. Follow a systematic order. Follow an order, have grammatically correct words used, make sentences so that it has connection with the previous sentences. And one more important thing is complete. Provide complete information. Do not provide incomplete information any point of time. In an organization, completeness is the most important thing. Make it small, make it precise, but complete. Remember, coherent, that is, have an order, use proper grammatical sentences, and be complete. And also be courteous. Never be a demanding one. Whenever you write a letter or whenever you write a draft or message or anything, be courteous to the person to whom you are addressing. Whoever it may be, have a politeness in your talk. The next is listening for understanding. Every time communication is effective only when the proper listening happens. Only if you listen properly, you can give the feedback properly. Many a times what happens is people just mock that they are listening, but they actually wouldn't have understood something. Listening is one of the important characteristics of effective communication. Next is focus and attention. Every time when you read an article, your focus should be on it and your attention will be on it, because nowadays the attention span of the person has reduced very drastically and people don't have much attention time. So make your message such a way that it will be understood by the person within the time. And emotional awareness and control. Every time whenever you read a message or you are in a part of communication, you should be emotionally stable and you should think objectively, not subjectively. So these are the effective characteristics of communication, or to make a communication effective, these are the characteristics to be followed. Now, what are the barriers in communication? First of all, what is barrier? Something which stops from smooth flow, right? We have seen road barriers. Why are there barriers? To reduce the speed or to stop something, we put barriers. So similarly in communication also we have some barriers. See, first barrier is physical barrier. Whenever you are in an organization, an external sound or any other sound will always stop you from smooth flowing of communication to others. For example, say you are speaking to your department head who sits over other branch through phone. What happens? There is a huge noise surrounding you. You cannot communicate to them easily, right? That is physical barriers. The next type of barrier is organization structure. Many a time what happens is there will be a wall between two people, or the structure will not be so easy. We had seen, right, star network, vertical network. Sometimes in some organization it is not easy for a subordinate to go and talk to the direct top level management. Then what happens is, if the communication is passed through too many channels, the original message will lose its value. We have seen that, right? You say something to your friend, from there your friend to your friend to your friend, there is a loss of data. That happens in organization as well. When the structure is too complex, like how you see in the picture, interlinked, interlock, all those things, the data will not be complete when it reaches the final destination. The next is cultural barriers. See, in an organization, people from different background work. So it's not that everybody will be taking each and everything similarly. Few people will have their own different set of culture, few people will have their own different set of culture. So this cultural barrier will act as an important barrier in communication. To overcome it, people should accept that they all follow a culture of the organization rather than their own personal culture. They should realize that they are in an organization and they should follow the work culture rather than personal culture, follow the work culture. The next barrier is emotional barrier. What is emotional barrier is, one may not be ready to listen to someone, or one may not be ready to accept some ideas from the others. The next is perception barriers. When there are two individuals, there are different type of perceptions. One may be very friendly, the other may be very stubborn. Perception changes from person to person. How you see a particular decision or how you see a particular point will not be same by somebody other. So perception barrier is also very difficult barrier in communication, what we can call. The next is physiological barriers. In an organization, it is very difficult for people with some physical problem. Like for example, a person may not be able to see something very properly, or he may have some problem in hearing the things or visualizing the things. That is all physiological barriers. The next important thing is technological barriers. This happens in organization many a times. Many organizations takes time to adapt to the new technology. What happens is, they will be using the obsolete technology and there will be an upgraded technology in the market. Suddenly they cannot cope up with the technology. Then there is so much of problems happening in the organization. Say for example, a person sitting in Bangalore branch or any branch will be using one particular version of your Microsoft Office or Windows, and he will be intending to send the message to somebody else who is using the higher version of it. What happens? Many a time the data cannot be used by the person. That is technological barriers. Next is attitude barriers. Attitude is a mindset of people. We make our mindset in such a way that whatever is, this is my attitude, I may not respond to it properly. So attitude barrier again hampers the smooth flow of communication. So thus communication leads to community, understanding, mutual value, everything. Communication is a way to lead a life. Communication is an important aspect of everyone. Do not take it as a module to study, but take it as a subject which is helpful for you throughout a career. A person who is able to communicate properly will always be a person who gets the career opportunity to grow. With this, let's conclude our first module. Communication is really necessary in our day-to-day activity. So thank you. See you next time soon.